The scorching July heat in London was unlike anything the city had experienced in decades. Temperatures soared above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the usually mild British summer into something resembling a desert. At Buckingham Palace, the famous red-uniformed guards stood at their posts, their heavy wool uniforms and towering bearskin hats becoming instruments of torture under the relentless sun. Guard Marcus. Webb had been on duty for 2 hours, and sweat was pouring down his face beneath his ceremonial hat. The thick red tunic, designed for much cooler weather, felt like wearing a furnace. His white gloves were soaked with perspiration, and his legs felt unsteady beneath him. But his training demanded he remain perfectly still and silent. Around him, tourists moved sluggishly through the palace grounds, many carrying water bottles and seeking shade wherever they could find it. Ice cream vendors were doing record business, and the palace staff had set up additional water stations for visitors who were struggling with the extreme heat Marcus had been serving. As a royal guard for 3 years, and he took immense pride in his duty, coming from a working-class family in Manchester, this position represented everything he had worked for: honor, tradition, and service to the crown. His father had been a factory worker his entire life, and seeing his son in the prestigious red uniform filled the family with pride they had never imagined possible. But today, the heat was testing Marcus beyond anything his training had prepared him for. His vision was starting to blur slightly. Still, he maintained his rigid posture, eyes fixed straight ahead, determined not to show any weakness. Among the crowd of tourists was Jake Peterson, a 22-year-old American college student on a summer backpacking trip through Europe. Jake had been documenting his travels on social media, always looking for content that would get likes and shares from his friends back home. Jake was sweating profusely, in just shorts and a t-shirt, constantly wiping his forehead with a towel. He couldn't imagine how the guards were managing in their heavy uniforms. As he watched Marcus standing motionless despite the brutal heat, an idea began forming in his mind. "Dude, look at that guard," Jake said to his traveling companion. "Brett, he's got to be dying in that outfit. I bet he'd love some water right about now." Brett looked at the stoic figure of Marcus, noticing the slight sheen of sweat visible on the guard's face. "Yeah, man, that's got to be brutal. But isn't he not allowed to move or talk or anything?" Jake pulled out his phone and started recording. "That's exactly what makes this perfect. Watch this. I'm going to help him cool off." What Jake planned as a harmless prank was actually a serious breach of protocol that could result in immediate arrest. Tourists were strictly forbidden from interfering with the guards in any way. But Jake either didn't know this or didn't care. He was focused on creating viral content for his social media. Followers. Jake had purchased a large bottle of ice-cold water from a vendor, originally intending to drink it himself. But now he saw it as the perfect prop for what he thought would be a funny video showing him helping the overheated guard. "This is going to be hilarious," Jake whispered to Brett, making sure his phone was recording. "I'll splash him with water to cool him down. We'll see if I can make him break character." Brett looked uncomfortable. "I don't know, man. That seems kind of disrespectful. These guys are like really serious about their job. Come on, it's just water," Jake insisted, his phone already recording as he approached Marcus's position. "I'm doing him a favor. He's probably grateful someone finally thought to help him cool off." Marcus, trained to be aware of everything happening around him without moving his eyes, noticed the young man approaching with a water bottle and a phone. His military instincts immediately recognized potential trouble, but his orders were clear: maintain position and composure no matter what distractions occurred. The crowd around them began to sense that something was about to happen. Other tourists stopped their conversations and turned to watch as Jake positioned himself just a few feet from Marcus, his phone held high to capture the perfect angle. "Hey, guard," Jake called out cheerfully, as if talking to a friend. "You look hot, buddy. Let me help you cool down." Without warning, Jake unscrewed the cap of his ice-cold water bottle and threw the entire contents directly at Marcus. The shock of the freezing water hit the overheated guard like a physical blow, soaking his uniform, his hat, and streaming down his face. The crowd gasped in shock and horror. Several people immediately began pulling out their own phones. But not to join in Jake's prank. They were documenting what they recognized as a serious incident. Marcus stood there, dripping wet, his carefully maintained uniform now a soggy mess. Water dripped from the brim of his bearskin hat and ran down his face, mixing with the sweat that had been building up for hours, for a moment that seemed to last forever. Marcus remained frozen in his formal stance, processing what had just happened. The cold water had indeed provided relief from the heat, but the humiliation and disrespect of the act hit him harder than any physical discomfort ever could. Jake laughed loudly, still holding his phone up to capture Marcus's reaction. "There you go, buddy. All cooled off now." He turned to his camera with a huge grin. "Did you guys see that? I just gave a royal guard a shower. He can't even react. This is perfect." The tourists around them weren't laughing. An elderly British couple looked absolutely horrified, and the woman clutched her husband's arm in dismay. "How dare he?" she whispered loudly. "That young man should be arrested." A family with small children quickly moved away from the scene, the parents clearly uncomfortable with what their children had just witnessed. Other visitors began murmuring among themselves in multiple languages, but the tone was universally disapproving. Marcus felt water continuing to drip from his uniform onto the ancient stones beneath his feet. His bearskin hat, which normally sat perfectly positioned, was now heavy with water and slightly askew. The red wool of his tunic had darkened with moisture and his white gloves were completely soaked. But more than the physical discomfort, Marcus felt something much deeper, a profound sense of violation. For 3 years, he had stood at these posts with dignity and pride, representing centuries of British military tradition. In a single, thoughtless moment, his tourist had reduced that honor to a joke for social media. Jake continued filming, apparently oblivious to the negative reactions around him. "Come on, guard. Not even a smile? I know you're grateful for the cool down." Brett tugged at Jake's arm nervously. "Dude, people are staring at us. Maybe we should go? Are you kidding?" "This is gold," Jake replied, keeping his phone trained on Marcus. "Wait until everyone back home sees this. I bet I get 1 million views." What Jake didn't realize was that palace security had been alerted the moment he threw the water. 2 plainclothes officers were already moving through the crowd toward his position, and uniformed security was not far behind. Marcus could hear the murmurs of disapproval from the crowd, and he knew that his fellow guards at other posts had witnessed the incident. The Brotherhood of Guards was strong, and he could sense their anger on his behalf, even though they remained at their positions. In his earpiece, Marcus heard the voice of his commanding officer. "Guard Webb, maintain position. Security is handling the situation. Do not respond to provocation." The command was clear. But Marcus was fighting an internal battle unlike any he had faced in his military career. Every instinct told him to confront this disrespectful tourist, to defend his honor and the dignity of his uniform. But his training demanded silence and stillness, no matter what occurred. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly gentleman stepped forward from the crowd, his face red with indignation. "Young man, what you've done is absolutely disgraceful," he said to Jake in a voice that carried clear authority. The man was Colonel James Whitmore, retired. A 70-year-old former military officer who recognized the significance of what had just occurred. He had served 40 years in Her Majesty's Armed Forces and understood it's exactly what the guard's uniform and position represented. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Colonel Whitmore demanded, positioning himself between Jake and Marcus. "That man is a serving soldier, not your entertainment." Jake looked confused by the angry response. "Relax, old man. It was just water. I was helping him cool off. It's like 90 degrees out here. Helping him?" Colonel Whitmore's voice rose in disbelief. "You've humiliated a man who cannot defend himself due to his duty. You've disrespected not just him, but the uniform he wears and everything it represents." Other tourists began gathering around, clearly supporting the colonel's words. A woman with a slight accent stepped forward. "I am visiting from Germany, and even I know this is very wrong. In my country, we respect our soldiers." Jake's confidence began to waver as he realized the crowd was turning against him. "It was just a prank, guys. Lighten up, just a prank." Colonel Whitmore stepped closer, his military bearing evident despite his age. Son, that man standing there has sworn an oath to protect this realm and its people. He stands in that uniform as a symbol of duty, honor, and sacrifice. And you've made him into your personal joke. Security officers finally reached the scene, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one officer said to Jake, his tone professional but firm. "Wait, what?" "Why?" Jake protested, still clutching his phone. "I didn't do anything illegal." "Actually, sir, you did," the officer replied calmly. "Interference with royal guards is a serious offense under British law. You'll need to accompany us for questioning." As security began to escort Jake away, he turned back toward Marcus, still filming. "This is crazy. All I did was throw some water on him." But Marcus remained motionless, water still dripping from his uniform. His face a mask of professional composure that gave no hint of the emotions churning beneath the surface. Colonel Moore approached Marcus's position, standing at respectful attention. "Guard, I want you to know that decent people recognize your service and your sacrifice. What happened here does not diminish your honor in any way." Marcus couldn't respond or acknowledge the colonel's words, but he heard every syllable, and they meant more to him than Jake's prank had hurt him. As Jake was led away by security officers, the crowd that had witnessed the incident began to disperse. But many people lingered, clearly affected by what they had seen. Some approached Marcus's position to offer quiet words of support, while others took photos, not for entertainment, but to document what they saw as an act of disrespect that needed to be remembered. Marcus continued to stand at his post, his soaked uniform growing heavier as the water settled into the wool fabric. The extreme heat that had been torturing him earlier now worked in reverse. As the wet fabric began to chill his skin despite the warm temperature, his commanding officer's voice came through his earpiece again. "Guard web relief is coming in 10 minutes. Maintain position until then." 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Marcus could feel every drop of water as it continued to trickle down his face and neck. His bearskin hat, waterlogged and heavy, pressed down on his head with uncomfortable weight. But beyond the physical discomfort, he was processing the emotional impact of what had occurred in the palace security office. Jake found himself in a small, official-looking room with two officers who were taking the incident very seriously. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "Mr. Peterson," Security Chief Inspector Patricia Davies began, reviewing Jake's passport, "do you understand the severity of what you've done?" "Look, I'm sorry if I caused a problem," Jake said, his voice much smaller than it had been earlier. "But it was just water. I was trying to help the guy. He looked really hot." Inspector Davies studied him with the expression of someone who had seen many tourists make poor decisions, rarely ones this thoughtless. "Mr. Peterson, Royal Guards are serving military personnel carrying out official duties. What you did constitutes assault on a service member and interference with royal protocol." Jake's face paled. "Assault. But I didn't hurt him." "You threw liquid at a soldier who was unable to defend himself due to his official duties," Inspector Davies explained patiently. "In British law, that is indeed assault, regardless of your intentions." Meanwhile, back at Marcus's post, something remarkable was happening. Word of the incident had spread through social media, but not in the way Jake had hoped. Instead of viewing his prank as funny, people were expressing outrage at his behavior and sympathy for the guard. Colonel Whitmore had remained near Marcus's position, and other veterans in the crowd had joined him. They formed an informal honor guard of sorts. Elderly men and women who understood the significance of military service and wanted to show their respect for the young soldier who had been humiliated. That guard has more discipline in his little finger than that foolish boy has in his entire body, muttered a woman who had introduced herself as the widow of a Royal Navy officer. When Marcus's relief finally arrived, the transition was carried out with extra ceremony. Guard Harrison approached with perfect military bearing, saluted Marcus formally, and took his position. Only then was Marcus allowed to step away from his post, but instead of immediately heading to change his uniform, Marcus did something that surprised everyone present. He turned to face the small group of veterans and supporters who had remained nearby, came to attention, and delivered a crisp military salute. The gesture was brief but profound. It acknowledged their support while maintaining his military dignity. The elderly veteran straightened with pride and returned the salute, creating a moment of mutual respect that brought tears to the eyes of many witnesses, as Marcus finally walked away to change his uniform. Colonel Whitmore called after him, "Guard, well done, son. You've upheld the finest traditions of service." Marcus paused for just a moment, turned back, and gave the slightest nod, the only response he could offer while still in uniform, but one that conveyed his deep appreciation for the support he had received in the palace-changing facilities. Marcus finally removed his sodden uniform. The red tunic was completely soaked through, and his bearskin hat would require professional cleaning and restoration. As he peeled off the wet garments, he reflected on the events of the day. His initial anger at Jake's disrespectful behavior was beginning to transform into something more complex. He realized that the incident had revealed something important about the people around him. The vast majority had recognized the inappropriateness of Jake's actions and had stood up for him when he couldn't defend himself. Sergeant Major Phillips, Marcus's direct superior, entered the changing area as Marcus was putting on dry clothes. "How are you feeling, Webb?" "Wet but fine, sir," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "Though I think my hat may never recover," Sergeant Major Phillips chuckled. "The hat can be replaced. Your dignity and professionalism cannot. You handled that situation exactly as a Royal Guard should." "Thank you, sir." The support from the public was ... unexpected. Good people recognize good service. Webb, don't let one foolish tourist make you forget that. As news of the incident continued to spread online, the narrative was not what Jake had anticipated. Instead of praise for his prank, he was receiving widespread criticism. Comments poured in from around the world, with people expressing respect for the guard's composure and disgust at Jake's behavior. Imagine standing in that heat in a wool uniform and still maintaining your dignity when some idiot throws water at you, wrote one commenter. That guard showed more class in silence than most people show with 1,000 words, wrote another. The incident was becoming a powerful lesson about respect, duty, and the way decent people respond when they witness injustice, even in small forms. Back in the security office, Jake was learning about the serious consequences of his actions. Inspector Davies had laid out the potential charges he could face, and the reality was far more severe than he had imagined. You could be looking at a fine of up to £5,000 and potentially a brief detention, she explained. More importantly, this incident will be reported to the American Embassy, as it involves conduct by a U.S. citizen that reflects poorly on diplomatic relations. Jake's hands were shaking as he processed this information. I really didn't think it was that serious. Can't I just apologize? An apology would be appropriate, Mr. Peterson, but it doesn't erase what happened. However, given that this appears to be a case of extreme poor judgment rather than malicious intent, we may be able to work out an alternative resolution. Inspector Davies explained that if Jake was willing to participate in a formal apology process and make a charitable donation to a veterans organization, the charges might be reduced to a caution rather than a criminal conviction. The guard you targeted, his name is Marcus Webb, and he served with distinction for 3 years. If he's willing to meet with you, face-to-face apology would carry significant weight in how this case is resolved. Meanwhile, the story was spreading far beyond London. News outlets had picked up the viral videos. They were framing it as a story about disrespect for military service rather than amusing content. Military veterans organizations were sharing the story as an example of the challenges faced by service members and the public. Marcus's own family learned about the incident when his younger sister called him. Having seen the video online, "Marcus, are you okay? I saw what that awful tourist did to you." "I'm fine, Sarah," Marcus assured her. "It was just water. I've been through much worse in training, but it was so disrespectful. Dad is furious. He says that boy should be in jail." Marcus thought about this. His father, who had worked hard his entire life and was so proud of his son's service, would indeed be angry about the disrespect shown to the uniform and what it represented. The important thing, Marcus told his sister, is how people responded. You should have seen the veterans who came to support me. It reminded me why I serve. That evening, Colonel Whitmore, who had so passionately defended Marcus during the incident, appeared on BBC News to discuss what had happened. The retired officer's interview became a powerful statement about military service and respect for those who serve. We witnessed today was a young man who has been raised to believe that everything is content for his entertainment, Colonel Whitmore said. He failed to recognize that the guard he was targeting is a real person with real feelings, who has dedicated his life to service and duty. The interviewer asked about the guard's reaction. He showed remarkable restraint and professionalism. In my 40 years of service, I learned that true strength isn't about reacting to provocation. It's about maintaining your principles when someone tries to make you abandon them. The interview was shared thousands of times, with many people commenting that Colonel Whitmore had perfectly articulated why Jake's actions were so problematic. The next morning, Marcus reported for duty to find his commanding officer waiting with an unusual request. Webb, the American tourist from yesterday, has requested a meeting. He wants to apologize in person. Security says it's part of a formal resolution process, but the choice is entirely yours. Marcus considered this carefully. His initial impulse was to refuse. He had no desire to see Jake again, or to be part of some publicity stunt for the tourist's benefit. Sir, what would happen if I declined? Nothing negative for you, Webb. The case would proceed through normal channels. But sometimes giving someone a chance to make things right can be more powerful than punishment alone. Marcus thought about Colonel Whitmore's words about strength and principles. Perhaps meeting with Jake would be an opportunity to help him understand what his actions had really meant. I'll meet with him, sir. But I want it to be a real conversation, not a photo opportunity. Understood. It will be private in my office, with only security present. 2 hours later, Marcus found himself sitting across from Jake Peterson in a formal conference room. Jake looked very different from the confident prankster of the day before. He was pale, clearly nervous, and kept fidgeting with his hands. Guard Webb, Jake began hesitantly. I want to apologize for what I did yesterday. I realize now that it was wrong. Marcus studied the young man's face, looking for signs of sincerity beyond the obvious fear of legal consequences. Tell me what you understand about why it was wrong. Jake seemed surprised by the question, having expected to simply deliver his prepared apology and leave. Well, because it disrupted your duty? That's part of it, Marcus replied. What else? Jake struggled for a moment. Because it was disrespectful? To whom? To you. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Mr. Peterson, when you threw that water at me, you weren't just disrespecting one person. You were disrespecting every veteran who served before me, every soldier currently serving, and everyone who will wear this uniform after I'm gone. You turned a symbol of service and sacrifice into your personal entertainment. Jake's eyes widened as he began to understand the broader implications of his actions. I never thought about it that way. Marcus could see that his words were having an impact on Jake. The young man's casual attitude was being replaced by what appeared to be genuine remorse as he began to understand the magnitude of what he had done. I need you to understand something else, Marcus continued, his voice firm but not unkind. When I put on this uniform, I take an oath. I swear to serve and protect, to maintain dignity under all circumstances, to represent something bigger than myself. Yesterday, when you made me part of your joke, you were testing not just my personal restraint, but my commitment to those values. Jake sat in silence for a moment, processing Marcus's words. How? How do you do it? Stand there when someone is being awful to you and not react. Because my duty isn't about me, Marcus replied. It's about what this uniform represents. It's about the people who depend on us to be better than our impulses, to be steady when everything around us is chaotic. But doesn't it make you angry? Marcus considered the question honestly. Of course it does. I'm human. But being a soldier means learning that your feelings don't always get to dictate your actions. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain calm when someone expects you to lose control. Jake looked down at his hands. I keep thinking about all those people watching yesterday. They were so angry with me. I thought I was being funny, but everyone looked at me like I was some kind of monster. What did that teach you? That most people understand respect even if I didn't, Jake said quietly. Those older people who stood up for you, they knew something I didn't know. Marcus nodded. Colonel Whitmore and the others who spoke up yesterday understand what service means. They've lived through times when society depended on people willing to put duty before personal comfort. There was a long pause as Jake struggled with his next words. Guardweb, Marcus. I'm really sorry. Not just because I got in trouble, but because I hurt someone who was doing something important. I made fun of something that I should have respected, for the first time since their conversation began. Marcus sensed genuine remorse rather than fear of consequences. What are you going to do differently because of this experience? I don't know yet, Jake admitted. I guess I need to think about things more before I act. I need to consider how my actions affect other people. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Mr. Peterson, can I tell you something about the veterans who defended me yesterday? Jake nodded eagerly. Most of them served in conflicts where they saw friends injured or killed while protecting the freedoms that allow tourists, like you, to visit places like this safely. When they saw someone disrespecting a soldier who couldn't defend himself, it struck them personally. Not because they're angry people, but because they understand the sacrifice that service represents. Jake's eyes filled with tears. I never thought about any of that. I just saw someone in a funny hat who couldn't move, and I thought it would be entertaining to mess with him. And now I see someone who chose to dedicate his life to protecting others. Even when it means standing in terrible heat, wearing heavy clothes, and letting people like me be awful to him. Marcus studied Jake's face and saw something that gave him hope. The young man was genuinely wrestling with the implications of his actions, not just looking for a way to avoid consequences. Mr. Peterson, Inspector Davies tells me you've agreed to make a donation to a veterans organization as part of resolving this matter. Yes. Whatever amount you think is appropriate. It's not about the amount, Marcus replied. It's about understanding why that gesture matters. When you support veterans organizations, you're supporting people who gave up normal lives to serve something bigger than themselves. Some of them came home with visible injuries, others with invisible ones. All of them deserve better than being turned into entertainment. Jake wiped his eyes. Is there a way I can make this right? Really right? Not just legally right? Marcus considered this question carefully. You could start by sharing what you learned from this experience. Your social media posts went viral for all the wrong reasons. Maybe you could use that platform to share something meaningful about respect for service members. You would want me to do that. Even after what I did to you? Especially because of what you did to me, Marcus replied. If your mistake can help other people understand what they witnessed yesterday, then something good can come from it. Inspector Davies entered the room at that moment to check on their conversation. How are things proceeding, gentlemen? Marcus looked at Jake, who had clearly been transformed by their discussion. I believe Mr. Peterson has a better understanding of the situation now. I do, Jake said firmly, and I want to do whatever I can to make this right. Inspector Davies smiled slightly. Mr. Peterson, based on Guardweb's input and your apparent remorse, we're prepared to resolve this with a formal caution, a charitable contribution, and a commitment from you to share what you've learned from this experience. Jake stood and extended his hand to Marcus. Thank you for giving me a chance to understand. I promise I'll do better. Marcus shook his hand. We all make mistakes, Mr. Peterson. What matters is what we learn from them. 2 weeks later, Jake Peterson posted a video that went even more viral than his original prank. But this time, the response was completely different. Hi everyone, Jake said, looking directly into the camera with a seriousness that his followers had never seen from him before. A couple of weeks ago, I posted a video that I thought was funny. I threw water at a royal guard in London because I thought it would be entertaining content. He paused, clearly emotional. I was wrong. Not just a little wrong, completely horribly wrong. And I want to tell you why. Jake spent the next 10 minutes explaining what he had learned from his conversation with Marcus. He talked about service, sacrifice, and the respect that military personnel deserve. He shared Colonel Whitmore's words about the meaning of the uniform and the oath that guards take. That man I threw water at, his name is Marcus Webb, and he's a real person with a real commitment to protecting others. He stands in that heavy uniform in all kinds of weather because he believes in something bigger than himself. And I turned him into a joke for my social media. The video received over 2 million views in the first 24 hours. But the comments section was filled with respect for Jake's honesty and appreciation for his willingness to admit his mistake. This is how you apologize and take responsibility, wrote one commenter. Thank you for helping us understand why this matters, wrote another, Marcus, who had been given advance notice about the video, watched it with his fellow guards. His colleagues, who had supported him through the aftermath of the incident, were impressed by Jake's apparent transformation. He actually gets it now, observed Guard Harrison. That's more than most people would have managed. The story had a ripple effect that no one had anticipated. Military veterans organizations reported increased donations and volunteer applications. Tourism officials noted that visitors to Palace Guard locations were behaving more respectfully. Most importantly, Jake's follow-up video had sparked conversations about respect for service members across social media platforms. Colonel Whitmore, who had become something of a celebrity after his passionate defense of Marcus, was invited to speak at military academies about the incident. His talks focused on how the public's response demonstrated that most people still valued service and sacrifice. Even in an age of social media pranks and viral content, what we saw that day, Colonel Whitmore would tell his audiences, was the best and worst of human nature. One young man's thoughtless act, dozens of people's instinctive response to defend someone who couldn't defend himself. Marcus returned to his regular duties. But the incident had changed him as well. He had always taken pride in his service, but now he understood in a deeper way how much his role meant to others. The veterans who had stood up for him, the tourists who had expressed outrage at his treatment, and even Jake's eventual understanding had shown him that his commitment to duty resonated with people in ways he had never realized. 6 months later, Marcus received an unexpected letter from the United States. It was from Jake's father, a Vietnam veteran who had learned about the incident from his son. Dear Guard Webb, the letter read, I want to thank you for the way you handled my son's foolish behavior. As a veteran myself, I was ashamed of what he did, but proud of how you responded. More importantly, I'm grateful for the lesson you taught him about respect and service. He's a different young man now, more thoughtful, more considerate of others. You gave him a gift that will serve him well for the rest of his life. The letter went on to explain that Jake had joined a volunteer organization that supported homeless veterans in his hometown, and that he often spoke to other young people about his experience in London. Marcus shared the letter with Sergeant Major Phillips, who smiled as he read it. You know, Webb, they don't teach this kind of thing in guard training. What you did with that young man, showing him dignity even after he humiliated you, that's leadership at its finest. I just treated him the way I would want to be treated if I had made such a mistake. Marcus replied, Exactly. That's what makes the difference between punishment and education. The incident became part of the unofficial training curriculum for new guards, used as an example of how to maintain dignity under pressure and how their behavior in difficult situations could have far-reaching positive effects. Years later, when Marcus had advanced to become a training instructor himself, he would tell new recruits about the day he was soaked by a tourist and how it became one of the most meaningful experiences of his career. The guard's greatest weapon isn't his rifle or his training. Marcus would explain. It's his character. When someone tries to diminish you, the most powerful response is to remain true to your values. That consistency, that reliability, that's what people are really protecting when they stand up for us. The story of the soaked guard became more than just a viral video or a cautionary tale. It became a reminder that respect is earned through consistency, that dignity can be maintained even in humiliating circumstances, and that sometimes the most profound education happens when someone is willing to show grace to a person who doesn't deserve it. Jake Peterson never forgot the lesson he learned from Marcus Webb. He went on to become a teacher, specializing in helping young people understand the importance of empathy and respect for others. In his classroom hung a photo of the royal guards at Buckingham Palace, and he would often tell his students about the day he learned the difference between entertainment and humanity from a man who couldn't even speak to defend himself, but whose silence taught him more about strength than any words ever could.